My name is Laura Purdie, and I make cookies.
Welcome to I Made This from Do Anything Media, a show about passionate people executing their big ideas in realistic ways you can learn from to make your own big idea a reality. I'm Bill Meeks, and today I'm talking with Laura Purdie, who runs the Hey Sweetness Bakery in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She makes cookies for a living, beautiful cookies packed with detail and design. Now, she's been making sweet treats professionally for most of 2019, so we're going to be talking a lot about taking that step, as well as the care and craft that goes into making cookies. And if you don't want to bake cookies, no worries, you can still listen. Laura offered up a ton of great advice for creative people of any discipline, especially if you want to start a business based around your passion. Okay, I made this for you. Take a listen. Okay, so it goes completely against my diet, but we're going to talk about cookies today, right, Laura?
Yes, we're going to talk about cookies.
Why don't you go ahead and just give people a little bit of an idea of what your business is, where you are, all that kind of stuff.
So, currently I am actually located in Tennessee, but that's going to change in about 3 weeks. I'm moving to Melbourne, Florida.
Oh, nice.
Melbourne is where I was born and raised. And so it's just I've actually been in Tennessee for just over a year, but I really miss Florida. So, Hey Sweetness Bakery will be moving to Florida.
Be very careful. There are a lot of anti-cookie laws that have been passed since you've been here. So, just be aware of those.
Oh.
Yeah. It's all from Disney. They control the state, basically.
What's crazy is having to learn about laws when you open a business like that. I know you're kidding, but Disney and here in Tennessee, it's actually the Tennessee State, the college.
Uh-huh.
They have copyrights on really crazy things that you can't put on your cookie.
Oh, really?
I'm not allowed. So currently in Tennessee, there's a copyright on the white and orange checkerboard pattern. Literally a pattern. It's if you use these two colors in this pattern, it's copyrighted and they will sue you.
Is that just for cookies or is that for
No,
I don't know?
It's just anything.
Wow.
It's so weird. Anyway, but yeah, Disney characters is going to be a big one that I'm oh, we'll see.
Yeah, I've heard about them cracking down on people around here. A school have someone dress up as Elsa for an event and then Disney will show up with the lawyers,
I know, it's crazy. Anyway, okay, so I moved to Tennessee a little over a year ago. And believe it or not, when I came to Tennessee, I was not a baker at all.
Oh, wow.
I had never baked a cookie from scratch. I had never done any of that. When I was really young, starting from the time that I was a toddler, every year my mom does a Christmas cookie decorating party. Mm-hmm. But she would bake this really delicious homemade icing. And we would buy the store-bought cookie dough and we would invite our friends over and when you're younger, it's how much frosting and M&Ms can you fit onto a cookie?
Oh yeah. How much diabetes can I get on this cookie?
Exactly. And so, when we were younger, there was no creativity to it. It was just all sugar. But as we got older, it was still tradition. And so we were doing it. And, my mom would teach me little techniques here and there because she decorated cakes. And so she had some some techniques and she would teach us, but I really was never it was never something I thought to do professionally. It was never something I really even knew that I was that good at. I didn't. And then I moved to Tennessee, and coming to Tennessee, I had some time on my hands. I had really realized that I had gone a really good chunk of time in my life. I had probably gone several years without being creative. Mm-hmm. And so coming to Tennessee, that was one of my goals, was to find a way to be creative. I don't even really know why. I think it happened to be around Christmas time and my mom was let's bake some cookies. And so that sort of started a process. And I was this is fun. I'm going to start creating some cookies. And then I realized I was good at it.
Why don't we pause there for a second and just talk about it?
Yeah.
How did you come to that realization that you were better than you thought you were?
Basically by doing it and then realizing that I could. So a lot of times you when you start off anything, you kind of mimic what you're seeing. And so I would go on Pinterest and I would search for a cute cookie design, or I would see one that I liked and I'd be okay, let me try this. Mm-hmm. And I would try it and execute it really well. And I would just go oh, wow, that was really easy. And then, of course it helps when there's people around you going I cannot do that. Or my mom who, is wonderful and encouraging, she would try the same thing and kind of not be as good at it,
And she would be a category for like one of those Instagram, which are like baking fails or something.
That's right. Yeah, she nailed it. And so kind of realizing that like, oh, mine were actually pretty, and they were, and I was satisfied with them, which is a big deal because like, we are our own worst critic.
Absolutely.
And so there were moments where like I would look at my cookie and go, oh, I really like that. And I think it really matches what my vision was. Mm-hmm. And that was a big deal for me because, that satisfaction of you created something and your vision came to life and it's what you wanted. And like, that's a big deal, I think, for people, for anybody.
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite part of the creative process is having done something. Like when you're in there in the trenches working on something, it can be a big pain. It can be very stressful. But that moment you're like, okay, it's done and it's good and I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
That's just the most fulfilling feeling in the world.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so I started feeling that a lot when I was making cookies, and then I, would take some pictures and send it to friends and stuff. And they were just like, oh my gosh, you have to sell these. Like, like I would pay for those. Like, and so then my little business was born.
So you sent some pictures over of the cookies and everything. If you look at the album art for this episode, there'll be some pictures in there too. Cool. They're beautiful cookies.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, it's a lot of design goes into them. So did you have a background in design at all, or?
No, not at all. I took some art classes in high school, and I've always been sort of a here and there painter or drawer, but I don't really have any, no formal training or background or anything like that.
So you're a savant.
Yeah.
A cookie savant.
Cookie savant. Hey, I'll take it.
All right. So once you decided that you wanted to make this a business, hey, what were your first steps? Like, what were the first things you did to start that process?
So the first thing I did was ask myself the question, do I want this to be a business? And I think I learned that that's a really important question because I was a photographer for years. I had a wedding photography business. And basically what happened is when I had a passion for it. And then when it transitioned into a business, the passion sort of lessened. It waned, like it was one of those things where it's like when you do something for the love of something, there's a fire there. Mm-hmm. When you're doing something because you have to pay the bills and you need to like eat and pay rent, it becomes a lot more stressful and the dynamic changes.
For most people, spreadsheets completely rob you of any creative passion.
Yeah, for sure. And so that I had already experienced. I knew that was a very real possibility for a lot of creative things that we do, for anything, hobbies and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so the first step was going, I really love doing this. I'm enjoying it. I'm good at it. Is turning this into a business going to take away some of that passion and joy for me? Like kind of exploring that and being honest with myself about it. And I kind of decided that really I didn't quite know. I didn't quite have an answer. And so I was just going to, I was going to take it one step at a time and then, learning lessons from the past too. I decided if there was an aspect of the business that I really wasn't good at or didn't like, i.e. spreadsheets, that I would like outsource that, or I would ask for help with that.
You could put together your spreadsheets on a cookie.
That
way you're serving both masters.
That's amazing. And I might have to try
it. That's interesting though, that, you had sort of this experience with the photography business and it left you kind of wanting. And then several years later, you circle back around to do another business. I'm kind of in the same position right now because I ran for 5 or 6 years. I ran a freelancing business where I did mostly video production for companies, explainer videos, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And it just completely sucked the life out of me because it was all so dull and nobody wanted me to be creative and do cool, funny things. And so I went to corporate America for a few years. And then, after I think 7 years of being there, I was like, wait a second, maybe I should go back now that I have all this corporate experience and I'm a bit more sure of myself and what I want out of life, and go back and try and approach the business again. And I found it so far, I'm only about a month in. But I found it to be very rewarding and everything I wanted it to be. So how did you find it when you circled back around and made it a business?
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that you're in that position too right now. I found it the same way. I found it really rewarding. I found it really exciting. I think that creativity in general just ignites something in people, like I think we're wired for it and we need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, just the idea of like, I was creating something, and even, like, yes, on a small scale, I create cookies, but even the idea of like, okay, I'm creating a business, like I'm creating a bakery, like, and having a vision for what that looks like down the road. And
mm-hmm.
it was exciting and fresh, and I felt rejuvenated by it. And it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, this gives me life again. And I maybe forgot what that felt like while I was working the 9-to-5 or, whatever corporate America or whatever draining job you're doing.
Yeah. And I'm sure it probably gives you an opportunity to sort of, define your own life too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say it's all easy. I actually was thinking this morning just kind of about this interview, and I was like, man, it's funny because when we talk about the creative process, oftentimes people just talk about like the joy and the like whatever, but
mm-hmm.
part of the creative process is like there's pain in it and there's frustration in it. And so there have been moments where it's like, I do hate spreadsheets. Thankfully, I'm blessed with a mom who loves them and is very good at them. And so I just call or text my mom and I'm like, I need help. But, there have been moments even in the cookie making process where it's like there's a total fail, or you disappoint a client, or even just the process, right? Like I hate coloring frosting. It's like the worst part of it for me. And every time I sit down to do it, I'm like, I cannot wait for the day that I can pay somebody to do this for me. But to get to that place, to build my vision, to build what I want, you have to do the work. Like you have to do the stuff that you don't like. Sometimes you have to do the stuff that's frustrating. And that is also part of the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes it all the more rewarding when you do come to the end of it, right? Like when you do see it all come together and you're like, oh gosh, that like breakdown I had where I was like, not sure it was going to work out. It's totally worth it now,
Yeah. I think what you're talking about, I generally refer to, and I apologize, I didn't language check you before we started recording.
Oh, you're fine.
But yeah, I call that shoveling the shit,
Exactly.
It's the stuff you have to do to get to the stuff you want to
do. Exactly. It's just such an important part of the process, in my opinion. Like, I think we hate it, and you have to do it, and everybody just like put your head down and get through it. But I think what would happen is if we removed that part of the process, right? Like if nobody ever had to shovel the shit
mm-hmm.
to get to their dream, it would suck.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be as satisfying. I don't think it would be as worth it. I don't think that creating would be the life-giving thing that it is, because that's part of the process. Is like, we all have to shovel the shit, and whatever that looks like for you, whatever industry you're in or whatever you're creating. I just think we cannot get rid of that portion of it,
What's the quote? Anything worth doing, or oh no, I'm trying to remember the quote. I'm completely messing it up right now.
No, I know what you're talking about. It's like anything worth doing is hard, or
yeah, something along those lines. But yeah, it's one of those things where that pain and that frustration and those things you have to work through to get to something is where you derive most of the satisfaction.
Yeah.
That's where most of the satisfaction comes from, because it's a stress release.
Yeah.
Once you finally get to that end point and you have that product and you're happy with it, it's just a massive stress relief. It's a dopamine rush straight to your brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about shoveling the shit more.
Okay, yeah.
So, you decided to build this business. Mm-hmm. So how did you first start going around trying to get clients and things like that for a business like this?
Mostly it was word of mouth at the beginning. I a little bit of social media. I had like an Instagram and a Facebook, and you hashtag like local hashtags, and but then a lot of it was word of mouth. Things like friends that I had, whether at church or I had made some friends at a local coffee shop, and just kind of telling them like, this is what I'm doing, and if you need any cookies, let me know. And at first, it's like you start out just kind of doing it for friends and family, but it picked up. I think that was encouraging to me, because I was like, oh, I'm not just doing this for friends and family anymore. I'm like doing this. I think the first time I remember I remember actually calling a friend of mine in Florida the first time I dropped off, like I made a drop off to a client that I didn't know. So it was like I had given this complete stranger a platter of cookies that I had decorated, and she loved them. And she was like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. They're perfect for this party. And I called my friend and I just cried. And I was like, she loved them. And like, I can't believe a total stranger just purchased my cookies. Like, you know, and it seems like such a silly thing to other people, but it's like, no, this thing that you created, like, that I really loved and worked really hard on. And I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this thing that I love doing. And just all of that kind of rushed in at once.
Yeah. And that outside validation is so important because, I mean, obviously, you know, your mom's going to tell you your cookies are awesome. Your boyfriend or your best friend or anyone is going to tell you your cookies are awesome. But when you hear it from somebody who has no social obligation to you whatsoever, in fact, someone who's paying you and is expecting a good product, compliments the product, you're like, oh, perfect. Because they didn't have to say that.
No, they did not. And yeah, exactly that. It's like you suddenly go like, I thought I believed everyone else in my life, but now I know they were telling me the truth because this total stranger who doesn't have to tell me. Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of attracting total strangers as clients, specifically over social media, did you find that particularly useful, or did you get clients specifically from that? And what tips do you have for someone who's trying to, you know, build a business using social media? Because specifically what you said about the hashtag stuff, you know, I'm currently building a business right now and I want to try and get into that more, but it feels so spammy to me that I'm very like, my punk rock heart is very like resistant to the idea. So I need you to explain this to me and tell me why it's not completely selling out.
Okay. Okay, that's a tall order, I feel like.
Well, I mean, the whole purpose of this podcast is to have other people validate me, so go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, first of all, I get it. I get that it feels spammy. To be honest, it's not something I ever did when I lived in Florida before. And part of that is, so I moved to this community, this area right outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I don't know if it's the area or the community, but like there's this investment in the community that was new to me, I think, like an appreciation for the community. So up here, the area code is 865. So there was this hashtag that was trending all the time, and in my area at least. And this person, you know, this person actually created a business from it, and it was like hashtag 865 life. And so it was like life in this area code, and here's what it's like. And people all over would use this hashtag, like just going to like the you know, Market Square in Knoxville, or going to, you know, a little like farmer's market, or like events all throughout Knoxville, the greater area, would use this hashtag. And this person created like a business, and they have like hoodies and stickers and all this stuff. And, you know, at first I think I probably would have thought it was spammy, but I happened to stop and talk to this person at a booth. Like they had this like booth set up. And I was like talking to this person, and it was so genuine. And you could just tell this guy had such a passion for his community, his area. It was like, this is his home. These are his roots. You know, like he loves it here. He loves to see other people love it here. He loves when businesses flourish here. Like, I mean, everything was just genuine about his desire to see the community grow and do well. So anyway, that kind of kickstarted it for me, where I was like, oh, there's a community here that champions each other, like businesses doing well, entrepreneurs starting something. Like there's a desire to see dreams and vision come to fruition because we realize it's good for all of us. And so my goal, and you know, like I don't think it's new necessarily in Melbourne. I think I just wasn't looking for it in Melbourne, Florida when I was there before. So my goal when I moved back to Melbourne is to find those people, to find that community, to find the ones who are championing that vision, that drive for community, for connection. And I think to me, that's why it's not selling out, is it does have to be genuine. The thing is people know, like people can tell if you're just out to make money, like if you're just out to like, I want my business to thrive, and I'm gonna like, you know, if you're the type of person who's willing to step on other people to get to where you're going, like people are going to know, they're going to be able to tell. And eventually it's not going to work out for you, you know, like, and maybe that's naive, and maybe that's like me being like idealistic. I know that I can be, but I really truly think that like when you are genuine, people will you'll find those people that you connect to. And so that I think is where I would say it's not selling out. It's like, if you're genuine, do the hashtags for your community. Go to, I used to hate networking meetings, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I'm going to attend all of them. There are little communities or little pockets in places where people are like getting together for the goal of connecting. And maybe that, is also called networking. And if you want to call it networking, but it feels genuine, like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And I think too, you don't necessarily have to go to something that's like, oh, local business networking meeting. You can sign up for like a cooking class and end up meeting somebody who's right in your, field of expertise and connecting with them. And then all of a sudden you have this really good friend and partner who you can help each other out and grow together.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's such a good point too. Cause it's not necessarily the signs that are like, come show us your business, or like bring your business cards and meet 3 other people. It's like, no, it's in the authentic, like you said, a cooking class, or like, there is like a local business center where they have classes for entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So it's like, they're basically like, if you have a vision or something you want to do, we want to help you. So come, and like, we don't know what you need, but if you tell us your need, there's a room full of people who might be able to meet that need. And it's this idea of like, it doesn't have to look like a stiff, sterile, like
business suits and martinis kind of thing.
No. And I think honestly, I know like I'm a millennial and there's all kinds of ideas with that, but it's like, I think that we are moving into a season. There's a shift happening where like, I really don't think that's going to work in the future. Those types of corporate, cold, disconnected business models, they're just not going to cut it, and you even see that in the larger corporate world, like the huge, massive businesses moving towards like we need to connect with the heart of people, like, but really like they're responding to a shift that they see happening too.
Yeah. My one worry with that is, very much, I'm a millennial too, very much of like the hoodie startup founder, businessman kind of guy.
Yeah.
But then, as time goes on and, these people who were like the hip, cool kid, like Mark Zuckerberg, you see him, getting buttoned up and he's becoming, that corporate figure you look down on in your youth, or he probably looked down on his youth, but he's sort of transformed into that. And obviously that's a whole different level of success.
Sure.
But it's something I think we as millennials need to be aware of, that, that flip can happen at any time, from the authentic, sort of connection you're talking about to the cold-hearted businessman. And it probably has a lot to do with, level of success too. Once, 7-8 figures start getting thrown around, I'm sure that probably takes a lot of the heart out of it.
Money doesn't have to remove the heart of it. Obviously, I'm not there, and don't get me wrong, I'm not at all saying that I don't ever want to make that kind of money, because let's be honest, like,
you're like, no, I want to be the next Mrs. Fields.
Exactly. But just realizing that, I think too, like, we can be kind of judgmental or harsh when it comes to that. Like, like, I've never been in the shoes of somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or somebody like, I've never been in that position. Right. Like, and I don't know what I would do if I had all of those eyes on me, or all of that pressure, or all of that, whatever, like, and it's like, I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to make those decisions. So it's easy for me to sit in the seat of judgment.
Yeah.
And be like, like,
Zuckerberg.
Like, he's sold out, or like, there's no heart, or like, but it's like, no, like, I've never had to do that. And so I try and, I think, protect my heart from that too, where it's just like, okay, I don't want to resent the people who have like done something incredible just because, I maybe would have seen it play out differently. Because the reality is I didn't do it. Like, they did. So,
let's drift over a little bit to what you have done. And obviously that's making cookies. So why don't you tell me about some of your favorite projects you've got to work on?
Okay. So the Game of Thrones cookies were my favorite kind of product, like, end result. They were my favorite. They are a really good example of shoveling the shit, though, because it was so difficult.
What kind of cookies are these? No, I'm just kidding.
Because it was so difficult. So I did it at my best friend of like 15 years. We've been friends for a really long time. He is obsessed with Game of Thrones books, TV show. he's the guy that watches the YouTube fan theory like videos. So we tried to throw him a surprise party. It ended up not being a surprise, but
that so often happens.
I know. So I made these Game of Thrones themed cookies, and they were my favorite. And I have not watched the show. I have read 2 of the books. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like at a disadvantage, I think, with some of the imagery. So I basically was just Google image searching a lot of like Game of Thrones flags and things like that.
You're lucky you didn't end up with like some crazy random meme that somebody made or something.
Oh, I did. I had to sort through the memes.
Oh, okay.
For
gotcha.
sure. I had to sort through them. And I, a couple of times, like would message a friend and be like, is this the sigil for this house? Like, am I doing this right? Like, like I was just kind of out of my element. But in the end result, they are my absolute favorite cookies. I loved the way they turned out, but they were super, super hard and difficult. Because I'm really pretty new to this. Like I said, I've only been doing this for about a year. I don't have some of the tools that other cookiers have.
Is that the official term, cookier?
Yeah, cookier.
It makes total sense, but I never thought about it before.
I know, yeah. Some people, you can also say cookie artist. That's a term too.
But that makes me think of sandwich artist. And then that makes me think of really bad macaroon cookies from Subway.
Yeah, no, okay. We'll stick with cookier then. So some cookiers use projectors where you can project onto the cookie the image that you're trying to like make with frosting. And then there's an airbrush technique, and I don't have an airbrush yet. So there's a lot of different like tools that I don't really have quite yet. So doing all of those cookies, the Game of Thrones cookies by hand, was so nerve-wracking and stressful. But in the end, it was obviously so rewarding, and they're my favorite, and I love them.
Was it a situation where you just took a lot of time on each individual cookie, or you would do a batch? You're like, no, that's crap. Let's throw them in the freezer for me to eat later, and then I'll try again.
So it was a mixture of both. I did make a whole bunch. I made a big batch, and I had a whole bunch of extra kind of like, I did like the white background on all the cookies, and then just kind of started on them. And I took a lot of time on each cookie. I mean, I think each cookie probably took me at least 20 to 30 minutes. I mean, like just a lot of time on each cookie.
20 or 30 minutes to make, 1 minute to eat.
I know. I was just going to say, I think some people would be like, what a waste, because I'm just going to eat it. Like, but it's worth it to me. And I did mess up on a couple. So it was like having the extra cookies was kind of a backup where it's like, okay, I don't like the way that one turned out. So then I would try again, or like try the design again. And honestly, even my goal was 12, and I think I ended up with 10 or 11. Like I didn't even have a full dozen, which is, like at first I was like, I failed, but then I was like, forget it. I'm not doing that to myself. These are so good. I spent so long. So anyway, they turned out really great.
Nice. Okay. So I'm assuming if somebody downloaded this podcast and is listening to this podcast right now, they're interested in cookies. So do you have any cookier tips for the people listening?
Cookier tips, it's funny because when I first started, I reached out to a couple of bakers who one of them I did know in person because I had actually purchased from her before. And then another one I did not know, but I loved her work. Like I loved her. I was like following her on Instagram and just kind of obsessing over all of her cookies. And so I reached out to a couple of them, and they were so helpful and so kind and so sweet. So the first advice that I would give is like, get into the cookier community. Like there is a cookier community. I didn't know it, and it sounds silly, but it's there.
That's part of the dark web, right?
Exactly. It is there, and they are so, it's so helpful and it's so encouraging, because there were moments where I'm like, this didn't work out, or a product that I hated. I had this like gold dust that you use on some cookies, and I hated it and it wasn't working. And I just reached out to this, this person, and I was like, hey, what do you use? Because I love the gold on your cookies.
Yeah.
And people are so, like it's not a competition. It's not like,
it's a cooperation.
Yes. Nobody has been like, I'm not going to give you my gold the brand that I use because you're going to use it on your cookies. And like nobody's like that. Even in the community here, like I haven't experienced that locally, like where people are technically competition, right? Where it's like they can choose to come to me or they can choose to go to this other person. Even here in locally, it's been very encouraging. So I would just say my biggest tip is like get with people who are doing what you're doing because it's important for you not to feel alone and to have, people to lean on and go to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And creative collaboration in any form is so important to creation.
Yeah.
Because if you sit in a room by yourself and you create stuff for hours and hours and hours on end without talking to anybody, without networking or communicating with other people doing the same thing you're doing, you're eventually going to reach a point, you're going to plateau and you're not going to be able to move forward in your art or your creative business.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's super important.
The other thing that I would say I think is really important is if you hate a cookie, like if you hate the way it looks.
First of all, how dare you? Because it's a cookie. Second of all, go ahead.
But it's true because sometimes I have like hate it. Like I finish something and I'm like, oh, that's hideous. But here's my tip: step away from it for a while. And I think that this is true with everything because I actually used to do it with photography too. Oftentimes when you're staring at something for so long and you're working so hard on it and you've like been sitting or doing this thing or painting or whatever, whatever it is. But in this case, it's cookies. If you hate a cookie, step away from it for at least an hour or two. Like give yourself a couple hours away from it, take a break, and then come back to it. I promise, like 100% of the time, I do not hate it as much. And a lot of the times I'm usually like, oh my gosh, I actually love it now, which is so weird because it's like, it'll be like just a total pendulum swing. I will go like, I hate this cookie. I'll leave it, leave it alone. I'll wake up the next morning and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. What was I thinking yesterday?
Well, I think for me, because I experienced this too with stuff that I made.
Yeah.
It's good to have that critical eye, when you're working on something, but eventually you reach a point to where all you can see is the negatives. And you're not appreciating the things that you've improved through the process,
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it. I think that's exactly what happens. But, it happens to cookiers too. So step away from the cookie.
Just step away from the cookie.
My mom has to tell me that regularly where I'm like, I hate it. And she'll just be like, step away from the cookie. Like put it all down, step away from the cookie.
So you mentioned the airbrushing thing. Are there any other, advanced techniques that you're anxious to try or you're looking forward to getting into?
Yes. So the projector is a huge one. I think the projector is one I'm going to buy even before an airbrush.
Is it a special cookie projector or is it just a small projector that you use on cookies?
So they have both.
Okay.
There are cookiers who just use a small projector, like a really tiny, handheld or like, they have ones that attach to your phone. Like they have all different kinds.
Yeah.
But then there are actually specially cookie made ones where like they have like a stand and you can fit your cookie right in there. And it's like,
and I'm sure I'm picturing an accurate version of it in my head, but it's hilarious to me. Like I just picture like this big device where you just place the cookie.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, basically. So anyway, that I think is a really big thing for me where it's like, I am excited to be able to have the image that I want. Cause that's the hard part, right? Is like, I have an image and I'm like, this is what I want. I want to do this image. And like, but it's hard to get it like on the cookie. By hand,
Yeah.
And so the projector, I think, will help with that huge. And then the other thing is there's stencils is one that I haven't done yet, and I'd like to try. They have like, you basically like, there's a stencil, and then with frosting, you sort of like stencil, kind of like lay, just lay the frosting on there and scrape the excess off, and it like lays perfectly on the cookie. And I haven't tried it yet, but I would really, and it's kind of on my 2020 goal list is to just get into that area.
How do you do the stencils? Is it just like basically you make a graphic on the computer, print it out, and then cut it out with an X-Acto knife or something?
So actually there are whole businesses who sell cookie stencils.
Oh, wow.
Like they sell those. So like, I mean, you totally could. I could make my own stencil and that's exactly how I would do it. It's just like X-Acto knife it out. But you can go on Etsy or on Instagram and there are, people who are making hundreds of stencils. And you just go and buy them and you can tell them what size you want. And on Etsy, if you have a logo, you can send, there's custom ones. They'll take your logo and cut it out for you. So that is a whole business of its own. And that's probably what I would do, because I don't feel like taking the time to make my own.
Well, it's, focus on the work you like to do and
Exactly.
leave shoveling the shit to somebody on Etsy, right?
Exactly. And they've created a whole business out of it. So more power to them. I will fund their business by purchasing stencils.
I was a little worried that based on the episodes we've already had this week, that people might not be able to find a lot of the same kinds of information from somebody who does cookies, but everything you've said is really applicable to anybody in any creative profession.
Cool. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. I was thinking about it this morning, and I thought, like, the reality is that, like, I realize the people who are interested in cookies is a very small, probably percentage of people. Like, I know, like, people aren't out here like, oh, I want to find, like, how to make, like, it's just not a huge thing. But yeah. I realize that, like, the creative process itself is. And I think we're all, like, I know that, like, we get the creative process in general, I think, is like, everybody is creating something. We're all designed to create something. And I think we're all wired to create. And so we get really stuck sometimes on, like, what creation looks like in our world. But I think it's really important to have also an idea of, there are people creating things all the time that maybe I'm not seeing as a creation, but it's happening. Like, I'm creating cookies, but I think about it, and I have friends who are creating websites, and, like, I'm a millennial. I'm not a computer person. I haven't done coding since I, like, left MySpace, like, I'm not knowledgeable in that area, but, like, they're creating websites, or they're creating these fully functional apps that, like, just, it blows my mind. And I would have no idea how to do that, but, like, there is a creative process there that's happening for them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to just be aware of that and, like, honor what's happening in other people's process, because, like you said, there were times where it's like, you're saying something and I'm feeling the same thing with cookies, or I'm saying something and you're going, I'm going through that in my business right now. We're not as different as we feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've found a really good piece of inspiration for a podcast or a book I'm writing or a video I'm making from, I don't know, an interview with the lead singer of Spin Doctors, just like something completely random you would never think would relate, and it sort of synergizes and you're like, oh, wait a second, that's a great connection.
Yeah, that's so true. So I was raised in a Christian home, and there's this really beautiful idea in Christianity, that people are made in the image of God. And so that's kind of the wording that's used in the Bible. And it's like, every person, like, every single person on earth is made in the image of God. And so there's this reflection of God in them, right? In each individual person. And I have kind of latched onto that idea and that concept, because to me, I think it really helps me find inspiration in places where I would not normally, or maybe where we wouldn't normally be looking. Because I think for me, it's like, okay, if every single person has something, a piece of God, or a piece of whoever your idea of a being is, or whatever, it's like, if every single person has a piece of this creator that I am unfamiliar with, or that I've never encountered, then I get to learn something new about creation in general, or creating, each time I encounter somebody. And so for me, it's like, I try and just really stay aware of that, of like, there's something in each person, there's something in each individual. They have something that I can learn, that I can gain from, that I can find inspiration in, because there's a reflection of God in them that I've never seen. And it just, I don't know, it just keeps me open.
Yeah. And maybe, seeing enough of those reflections, maybe that'll help you get a better unified vision of God. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it also helps me remember, like I was saying, that, like, we're all designed to create. Cause I think it's like, it's really easy to look at, like, the rocket science engineer or the accountant who is just typing numbers into a computer all day and be like, they're not creating any, like, they're not creative. They're not a creative person. Like, and I have people in my life who say that. My mom actually says that a lot. I'm not a creative person. And I always like, stop saying that. Because I think we all are it's just in different ways. And so it helps me go like, there is a reflection in you of a creator. You're designed to create something. Mm-hmm. And just because it doesn't look like a cookie, or it doesn't look like, a painting, or it doesn't look like a comic book, like it doesn't matter. It might look like spreadsheets, right? Like, and I feel like it might look like something. It might look like a shuttle or whatever it is, but it's like, it's creating.
That's something Subway should have, a spreadsheet artist.
A spreadsheet. That's something I need.
No, but I absolutely love that. And people's creativity, it doesn't have to be, a work of art. It could be somebody who rearranges their living room every 2 weeks.
Yes.
But it's always a great, awesome, unique, beautiful rearrangement of the furniture and the wall paintings and everything like that. And that's where they're comfortable in creating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people should be unafraid to showcase that. Like, it's funny you use that example. I have a friend, her name's Ashley, and on Instagram, she's like this incredible, hospitable designer. She has such a creative eye, but she will do that. She'll like rearrange her living room or her home every couple months, and she'll post it on Instagram, and she'll kind of go like, and at the beginning she'll say like, if you're not interested, feel free to skip through this. But then she's got these like, tons of stories where she'll describe why she's doing this, or why she's moving this here, or why she's whatever. And if I'm honest, I don't always watch them, but it's like when I do watch them, I'm actually always like, oh my gosh, like she has such a passion for like making her home this beautiful space. Uh-huh. And I love that. So I just wish people would showcase what they're creating. Like, even though it feels small to you, even if it feels insignificant to you, because the reality is like, if you just get a little bit of bravery, a little bit of courage to showcase it, and even if that's on your Instagram stories or mm-hmm. a Facebook post or whatever, or texting your family, like whatever it is, just showcase it a little bit, because I think that sparks or ignites in other individuals something.
Oh, absolutely.
And when I was thinking about this interview too, that's kind of where I was like, even if you're not interested in cookies, like if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, I've never baked in my life and I don't care about baking, that's totally fine. But I still believe that we have something to gain from one another just in the creative process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Why don't you tell people where they can find your cookies, pictures of, and if they're in Tennessee or soon to be Florida, can actually maybe purchase some of your cookies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking to you. I am on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest as Hey Sweetness Bakery. And there's like a little logo with a rolling pin, really simple. And you can find me on all of those social media platforms, or you can email me at heysweetnessbakery@gmail.com. I'm really open. I love meeting new people. And even if you don't want to buy cookies, if you just want to like
talk about cookies for 40 minutes or so. Yeah. Perfect.
I would totally love that. If you just want to tell me how great they are.
Well, I think you'd have to send me some for me to know how great they are. That's not a request. That's a very strong hint.
Okay. Hint received.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you have your own big idea you've made a reality, we want to hear about it. Let us know by emailing imadethis@doanything.media. We'd love to share your project, or maybe even talk to you about it. You can follow the show at I Made This Show, all one word, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, that's at I Made This Show. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or on our website, imadethis.doanything.media. Again, that's imadethis.doanything.media. And if you do subscribe, make sure you leave a review so we can shout you out on the show. I'm Bill Meeks. Thanks for listening.